soldiers on both sides began to feel the strain as they attempted to deal with the mental and physical implications of prolonged, constant campaigning. Veterans of Antietam, Gettysburg campaigns wondered how they could survive this almost incessant brutalization, right? Day after day, week after week, the Battle of the Wilderness coming off immediately into Spotsylvania Courthouse. As one soldier put it, fighting has become an everyday business. We have become hardened to it as our normal condition. You see this very distinctly when a number of officers who had served capably for this, 3 years into the war, they reverted to alcohol, drug usage as a coping mechanism at this stage in the war. To give you some perspective, the Army of the Potomac alone had suffered approximately 37,000 casualties since May 5th at the Battle of the Wilderness is opened. Right? So, unlike earlier operations where the armies would typically, fight a battle and then disengage, Spotsylvania Courthouse came directly on the heels of the Wilderness, and this engagement at Spotsylvania Courthouse would last a week and a half, okay, without the armies breaking off distinctly. Although there were several days during this where there's not a whole lot of major fighting, especially, like I said, between May 12th and May 18th. The forces were still always in proximity, and therefore they had to be on alert for potential skirmishes or artillery bombardments at any moment. And this was all while they were within trenches and earthworks that had turned into pools of mud due to the torrents of rain.
There are tangible ways to repel an attack: artillery fire, musketry fire, and then there are kind of the larger intangibles. Many of you may be familiar with the story at Antietam of a Pennsylvania regiment whose attack was stopped by bees. Maybe you've heard of that story before. Something similar to that occurs here, where regiments are turned back not from fire, but by the things they see, witness, and smell. One example is as Confederate artillery opens fire on the 9th Corps attacking soldiers, the shells land amongst the dead, hit the corpses, and then splatter gore into the attacking Union soldiers, right? So Union soldiers are stopped in their tracks not by artillery fire, but by the gore of men who have been dead for 6 days being splashed on them. Penrose Mark, who's a soldier in the 93rd Pennsylvania, talks about it, and as he's talking about it, he's in the 6th Corps, he's going forward, and he says that the front rank can avoid the damage, right, because they can see it in front of them, but for soldiers in the second rank marching in step, they don't get that benefit. And so unfortunately a lot of these soldiers are stepping into the debris of the battle and turned back by such foul smells that many of the regiments stop their attack because they start to vomit. Some soldiers start to stuff green leaves up their noses trying to fight the stench, but many of these soldiers are stopped in their tracks even before all of this happens, right? And so Penrose Marks ends his quote with this: "Such a presentation of death, on the moment when death faced the living, was such an experience which had not confronted us before, nor afterward. And the stench which issued forth was such as made all of us feel sick at the occurrence." And what's important to note about that is that these men have fought since 1861. This is not their first show, right? But for the first time in their lives, they talk about the horrors of this place being repelled.
Grant's aide, Lieutenant Colonel Horace Porter, related this incident in particular. So he's talking about what he observed here with this Union casualty. He said, "The man's face was beardless, he was evidently young, his countenance was strikingly handsome, and there was something in his appealing look which could not fail to engage attention, even in the full tide of battle. The blood was flowing from a wound in his breast, the froth about his mouth was tinged with red, and his wandering, staring eyes gave unmistakable evidence of approaching death. Just then, a young staff officer dashed by at a full gallop, and as his horse's hoofs struck a puddle in the road, a mass of black mud was splashed in the wounded man's face. He gave a piteous look, as much to say, 'Couldn't you let me die in peace and not add to my sufferings?' The general," he's referring to Grant, "was visibly affected. He reined in his horse, and seeing from a motion he made that he was intending to dismount to bestow some care upon the young man, I sprang from my horse, ran to the side of the soldier, wiped his face with my handkerchief, spoke to him, and examined his wound. But in a few minutes, the unmistakable death rattle was heard, and I found that he had breathed his last. I said to the general, Grant, who was watching the scene intently, 'The poor fellow is dead.' I remounted my horse, and the party rode on. The chief had turned round twice to look after the officer who had splashed the mud and who had passed rapidly on, as if he wished to take him to task for his carelessness. There was a painfully sad look upon the general's face, and he did not speak for some time. While always keenly sensitive to the sufferings of the wounded, this pitiful sight seemed to affect him more than usual. So I think it's easy for us to label historical figures sometimes without ever fully comprehending the magnitude of emotions and factors that they experienced personally during these type of events. I think this story provides a brief glimpse into the unfathomably complex combination of responsibility, guilt, and empathy faced by the commander of an army or a group of soldiers in a battle like this.